This next one is more of a performance project because he didn't really have a problem. His name's Eddie Terrio. And to give you a perspective on Eddie, this is Eddie at the Olympics playing the guitar in his ski right after he finished his
He was
thing.
having a good time.
Real creative athlete, a really wonderful human being. And I've had a lot of fun working with him. So he's a 19-year-old slopestyle skier. He's been skiing since he was 4 years old. He's really had no major injuries. He did have and I think it may be one of the precipitators of his current state. He had a concussion when he was 16 years old where he kind of, I think he hadn't been eating or something. It's kind of vague, the story, but sounded like he was low blood sugar and kind of fainted in his classroom and fell on the floor and concussed himself. That was the major thing that was a historical background noise for him. So first exam I don't have, but I didn't do walking because I hadn't learned about walking gait. So the next one that I did this was the first time I really looked at his walking gait. And I've shared this with Matt before, and this is a pretty good one for people to see. And keep in mind, this guy is like a world-class slopestyle skier, and yet he's got some really interesting neurological stuff going on that we needed to work on. So real flat affect, sort of that frontal lobe stuff, bilateral cerebellar pattern, no arm swing, again, frontal lobe, left shoulder dropped, bilateral genuvarum, and he at the time was dealing with a right calf injury, which I suspect had something to do with I had seen him before this for a very short period of time, but this is when I was going to really start working with him, and he had recently strained his calf doing what he was doing, skiing.
For those who don't know the term genuvarum, that's the bow legs. His knees are in a varus position.
Did you want to comment on the video at all, Matt, or anything?
No, I just like how you understated that he has some neurological deficits that we should work on. Yeah.
So from a neurological assessment perspective, cerebellar drills caused facial threat expression a lot, but no range of motion decrease. His vision drills had trouble coordinating, always head tilted right, facial expression tics, some threat with pencil push-ups. But a lot of times he didn't demonstrate a range of motion threat, but more a lot of visual threat expression. Challenges seem to be very neurocoordinative based, frontal lobe and cerebellum centric. Vestibular drills, both otolith organ tests were positive for threat reduction for him, and proprioceptive drills were also threat reducing ankles, knees, hips. So those are kind of the things that came out of my initial neuro assessment with him.
Hold on one second.
Yep.
So from the bottom 2 points there with proprioception and the otolith organs being helpful, I would start to think probably more bottom-up activity is going to be better. Just observation here, okay? And then going back to the very top bullet point where the cerebellar drills cause facial threat but no ROM decrease, keep in mind, it's not a note for you, Scotty, but just for the group who's watching, keep in mind that idea of minimal effective dose from way back in first quarter of the mentorship, that it's possible that you're taking someone and you're having them do a task or an exercise or neuro drill, and you push right up to that threat threshold where they start to experience some threat. Normally, what we would expect is that when you hit that point, the first observation of threat, you've gone from your green sweet spot into your yellow diminishing returns, but you should still be better than where you started at the beginning of the graph. Everybody remember that lecture and that idea? So this is an interesting kind of anomaly that you can get threat expressions during the drill, but then range of motion doesn't change. So you're pushing right to the threshold, but you're still not getting an adaptation. So that, to me, is often indicative of that low frontal lobe connectivity. Okay, like we know that's present from what we saw in the gait assessment. So when you're let's call it hypoadaptation. Okay, that's not a technical term. I just kind of made it up to throw it in here as a placeholder. But when someone is hypoadapting to the inputs that you're giving them, I often see that connected with that hypofrontality, that the brain frontal lobe is deactivated. They're more working from survival brain, maybe like their posterior parietal lobe, the cerebellum, like basically their procedural memory and motor patterns are driving a lot of their activity. They're not getting a lot of driving activity from their cognitive frontal lobe. Does that make sense? To lay it all out that way? So hitting that point, going, I got my threat response, something should change. They should get better or get worse because I know I had some threat, but then nothing happens. I often will go back and look at frontal lobe when I find that, because it seems like that's weird. That's not how it's supposed to work. Correct. That's not how it's supposed to work. So, okay, cool.
So keep in mind with Eddie, he's a very busy athlete, a creative athlete. My ability to sort of interact with him and train him is very kind of plug and play. I'm always kind of looking at what can I change next? What can I change next over the last year and a half? So this was, again, for his initial hand flips. You can sort of see the frowny face, the deep focus. He always has a head tilt to the right. Struggle with sort of getting his elbow to not be involved in what he was doing. So he wasn't really a great hand flipper in the beginning. These are visual drills that you'll probably want me to pull out again, but what I found was he just, like, his head tilt on saccades was always there. He kind of always had to sort of refocus, reconnect with what he was doing. And then these two smooth pursuits drills, you could just see how sort of challenged to coordinate his arm and move, and as he has to concentrate, his head gets more and more tilted forward and focused. So there's kind of a lot of frontal lobe work going on just to sort of coordinate what he's doing there, which was interesting to me. And just reiterated again that we needed to work a lot on this stuff. Did you want to comment on any of this?
No, you summarized those great. I just like that it looks like he's wearing a superhero cape. But yeah, lots of frontal lobe, like the concentration, the postural adaptations, the slowness of the movement, all that indicates frontal lobe is struggling a little bit to coordinate all of this.
So in his initial programming, my objectives were to improve his coordination, bring purpose to his process. So with a young guy like this, who's very into, there was a lot of selling around training in general and sort of what's the purpose of and why are we doing this? Because he's a creative athlete. He's never really trained a lot to do what he does. So it's sort of bringing connectivity to what I saw, showing him the videos, having him go, "Ooh, yeah, I can see that." So had to work to show him some performance value in what he was doing and why he was doing it. Focused on cerebellar optimization with hand flips, vestibular inputs with the utricle slides and saccule bounces. And some of the local mobility inputs were a big focus in the initial programming. This is what he does. So to understand switch skiing, he'll take off and then he's going to land going backwards. And then he has to be able to look behind him and again, coordinate into the next jump that he's doing. Again, do whatever trick he's doing and then land forwards or backwards. So a lot of coordinative stuff going on in what this kid does for a living. So the switch became sort of an interesting thing for me that I wanted to work on with him. So this is kind of working on his actual qualitative switch dynamics through his hip and pelvis and trunk and making sure they were clean and well-founded. This is an example of how sort of poor he was on just sort of landing on one foot and balancing in the beginning. And you'll see how this kind of all improves over time. So, he just wasn't a really solid changer of load person. This is a drill I did just kind of with manifesting change in position on one foot and balancing, trying to get him to use his feet to coordinate. So these were some early drills and some early things I was discovering in him. This is what his.
Hold on one second, Scotty. Sorry. I just want to point out that these are great examples of integration drills. So they're sport specific. They're in a non-neutral stance. They're integrating a lot of vestibular and proprioception specifically, but he's also got his eyes open so he can visually orient to the environment. So putting the visual, vestibular, proprioception all together to get the balance in, to be more effective in his sport, these are really good examples of integration drills. So for any sport that's not performed just standing in a neutral stance, so that's like all of them, at some point you want to be able to create exercises like these to go, what's the sport activity that they need to do? How can I make it a little bit more compartmentalized? You know, this is not like random direction turns. Scotty gave him specific instructions, but let's break it down to just a little bit simpler and see how well the nervous system can integrate these systems in order to accomplish the task. So really good template to think on as far as doing sport specific application, to go, they got to do this. It requires these systems. How do I put them together? And 3 good examples here. So cool.
This is just, I would initially from I do a lot of specific dynamic testing to look at what the person actually does with their body. So this would be him. He would start in a switch position and jump off the box and land in a switch position. So change them, and you'll see it in future videos. So you can see on the left, this is what his position was to start and what his position was after we worked on his neuro and other things to get him into a better stance, and his position on the right and right after a certain amount of work. So from my perspective, if you land the way he lands in that left picture, immediately what's going to happen is the skis are not going to be going straight down the hill. They're going to be going in an action that he has to slow down, modify, change. So I want him to have a better linear expression of his switch position. And so that's one of the things I wanted to make sure I changed over time with the work that we did. So this would be, you can see after a little bit of work, how well he's now starting to own that switch. So we have him in a switch position and switching to the opposite side. One of the interesting things about him was his late turn of his head, which is something I'm working on a lot with him, is getting him to get his, and it's especially prevalent on the left more than the right, but it's like his eyes follow his body versus his eyes leading his body. So we've been working a lot on that recently. This is a little bit better at this point. It's still not what I want it to be, but he's a little bit more functionally connected to what he's doing. This is much further down the process. We've started to load some of the vestibular drills and head tilt them the opposite direction. You can now see that he can do a saccade with a head that's straight and a lot more connected to what he's doing. So that's improved dynamically. These are more recent pictures of him doing hand flips. So still elbow centric a little bit, but I'm able to change them and get him back into that. And he's actually a little bit less focused on looking at his hand all the time. That's improved over time. This, we've been doing a lot of frontal lobe stuff. This is actually quite fast for him. And he's not very fast at these things. And I put him in a bit of a ski stance to do it. And then I started working it. You can see how much slower he is when he has to do it in his switch position. So one of my goals in the future is to make him faster in switch position doing those drills. And then I integrate some of that backside look. So I would often sort of stand behind him and go, how many fingers have him turn and see me behind him while he's actually continuing to squat in place. So those are some drills I'm doing now. I've integrated head snaps into a lot of his warm-up stuff. So when we do like walking lunges, he'll be doing vestibular drills just to continue to improve his vestibular system and optimize it. And then this is much more recently. I've got him doing some VCR drills. He really struggles with the hula hoop style movement, keeping his head still. This is single leg balancing work that we do with head snaps. That's actually a bit of a bobble, but for the most part, he's getting better at being able to head snap, stay on top, move the kettlebell around. And then you see this is kind of a control, connect, landing drill I do just for sticking a single leg landing. And you can see, comparatively speaking to the earlier video, is a lot more comfortable, relaxed. His arms are relaxed. He can stick and control well.
Very cool.
Then this is again working on what I start doing now is I get him doing these, and then I go him right into his lift and optimizing a quick turn while he's actually loading the switch stance squat dynamics. And this is a much higher box drill for coordinating his ability to drop and stick. And again, he's still late on his head turn. We're working on that a lot, but this is a much higher box that he's dropping off of and controlling and coordinating. And he's much more linear and on point, which is what I want him to be. And then these are some other drills that I have him doing sort of because he has to do rail drills. So we got him doing rails and sort of connecting with spinning, landing, being in good ski stance position, and then working both his downhill ski dynamics and switch dynamics off of the rail. And then lastly, doing some balancing on his balls of his feet while he does his head tilts in that position and works that. And this is just to culminate, that was day one. This is probably after about 4 or 5 weeks, and this is very recent. So I think we can all see the difference between day one and now.
Yeah, just a little.
Yeah.
Cool.
So that's my my case studies for you. I hope they were valuable in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, extremely. Very cool. Just on those last few slides, I didn't want to interrupt because I'm conscientious of our time, but what I appreciate is some of the creativity of putting those exercises together where you have a certain neurological focus, but you've coupled them with the sport activity in order to break it down and to make those exercises. That's really, really cool. And while both cases we talked about were athlete-centric with performance athletes, I want to just make a quick point that the same strategies and the same creativity and ideas about exercise and movement can and maybe should be used with everyday clients as well. Right? Everybody has their own repetitive movements that they do, whether it's for their job or taking care of their house, taking care of kids, pets, family members, just basic daily activities. And learning enough about someone's lifestyle to give you those daily activities as a starting point to go, let's create an exercise that's like this, or let's create exercises like that activity. What it does is it connects some of the neuro focus that you have, like you see a deficit of something they really need to fix, but it allows you to connect it to something where they can actually feel the difference, both in the exercises and in their day-to-day life when they're not doing exercises.